So the story of Abraham, strangely enough, is this thing in the Bible we call a chiasm. In other words, it's one of those literary units where the first part and the last part of the story match each other, or at least interact with each other in a similar way. Then the second part and the second to the last part interact with each other, and then there's a middle part. And it looks like this. The first part of the story of Abraham is chapter 11, verse 10, all the way through chapter 12, verse 9. And we're doing chapter 12, verses 1 through 9 today. This relates to Abraham's ancestry and his calling. And then if you look down to the last segment, chapter 18, verse 1, some would say chapter 20, verse 1 to chapter 25, verse 18, this is primarily focused on the descendants and death of Abraham. So you have his ancestry and calling in the first section. You see how it interacts with his descendants and death. The second section relates to conflict in community in his life, chapter 12, verse 10 through 14, 24, which is similar to or interacts with the second to last section. More conflict in community in chapter 16, verse 1 to 17, 27. And then there's this central focus in the chiasm, which is always like the hinge on which everything turns, or it's the key to understanding everything else. And in this case, it is the covenant that Yahweh makes with Abraham in chapter 15, which is such a weird chapter. I love it so much. So that's the narrative design of the story. And where I'd like to start by introducing this story is to try to shift your perspective a little bit to the story itself and the wording of the story, rather than exclusively focusing on the events of the story. And the reason why should be intuitive if you think about it. And that's because think of Abraham, who lived over 100 years, and we have 13 pages of his life. So is it exhaustive? For sure not. There are, obviously, in somebody's 100-year life, there's massive amounts of material that are not included in this story. So the question, I think, that is most helpful, instead of what happened, why did this happen, why did God do this, why did Abraham think this, why did Abraham say that, that's a first layer of very legitimate questions we should ask. But more helpful than that is, why did the Moses writing team include this story and not so many others? Why did they write it in exactly this way? Why did they have this word in there that is an unusual word and it appears in this other? I wonder if those two stories are linked somehow. That's where the juice is. So clearly, biblical goal is not to give an exhaustive historical record, but a selection of expertly worded episodes that advance the grand narrative, which ultimately leads to Jesus. That's the overall purpose of biblical literature, is this grand narrative that leads to the coming of the one who crushes the serpent's head, which is introduced on page 3 of the Bible. But that is what serves that purpose is what we should be asking. What in here does that? And of course, the sub-purpose is what produces wisdom in the person who hears these words or reads these words. Remember, this is literature. It's not body cam footage. This is what we want in the 21st century. We want just show me the video from as many different angles as possible. I want to see the Ring camera on, video on Abraham's tent flap. I want to see what happened as historically as possible. And if God wanted us to have that supernaturally, he would have provided that. He would have given us video somehow or the other. But what he gave us was words. What he gave us was phrases. What he gave us was writing. I know it seems simple, but that's writing, and especially in this manner, is a whole different ballgame. You don't get every detail. You don't get the color of the flowers that were blooming at this time. You get what the biblical authors have been inspired to share, and it's very selective. So in biblical literature, Why are the words arranged in the way they are? Why are the phrases repeated the way they are? Why are these chiasms and structures like we saw in Genesis 1? Well, they're arranged to provoke reflection, to make you go, there's something going on here. There's a structure to this. There's intelligent life going on here that maybe I should be paying more attention to. And this reflection leads to wisdom about Yahweh's purpose and his plan. So the story of Abraham, as we just saw, it is a chiasm. It's itself. This whole story is one big literary structure, it shows that there's a great deal of intentionality that is behind the words of this story. And I just want to introduce you. We may be mentioning this from time to time, but the concept is important. There is such a thing as extended echo effect. What that means is that some sort of idea or maybe even phrase that occurs in earlier portions of the scriptures, you may see reflected in a later portion of scripture and like, this story is very similar to an earlier story. Or this phrase, which is an unusual phrase in the Bible, is almost copy and paste from this earlier section of the Bible. Why is that? And I assure you, it's not accidental. It's been inspired by the Holy Spirit into the minds of these literary geniuses on purpose. It's a strategy to get us to link these two things. So extended echo effect. So as an example, we have this event that is described in very interesting ways of Abraham pawning off his wife as his sister to avoid his life being in danger. This doesn't just happen once. It happens twice. And then it happens again with his son Isaac. And it's like, what happened here? Why is this story in there 3 times? Is it a mistake? It doesn't make any sense. This is a very intentional literary strategy. It's based on events, but the idea of this threefold occurrence of this in the lives of Abraham and his son, it means something. Okay, so I want to just read the first 9 verses together, and then we're going to break them down one at a time. Verse 1. Oh, and in this one class, I'm going to include some Hebrew words, which I'm generally going to avoid in future classes, just because we can get bogged down. But I want to, this is intentional, to create a sense of newness on this passage, to disorient us a little bit, so to shake us into seeing, oh wait, I'm looking at this through new eyes, but also to show how these Hebrew words tell us some things that maybe English translations, even the best ones, just simply can't provide. Okay, now, Yahweh said to Avram is how you would pronounce it in Hebrew, go. The Hebrew word for go here is halak. Go, halak from your eretz. If you've taken the Genesis 1 through 11 class, you know eretz is an important word. Go, halak from your eretz, and from your relatives, and from your father's house, to the eretz which I will show you, La'ader. So go from your eretz and your relatives, your family, your father, to the eretz that I'm showing you. Verse 2, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will barak you, and make your Shem great, and you shall be a barak. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who kalals you, I will arar. Both are words for cursing, but they're different words. And in you, all the families of the Adamah will be blessed. So Abram went away as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Avram took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot and all their possessions which they had accumulated and the people which they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Avram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanites were in the land at that time. And the Lord appeared to Avram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Then Avram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. Let's break this down. Now, verse 1, first part of verse 1. Now Yahweh said to Avram. So the last time, or the time before this, where we have Yahweh speaking directly to one of the characters, is in Genesis chapter 6, verse 13, when God speaks to Noah. And at that time, the reason he was speaking directly to Noah was to pluck Noah out from the mass of humanity to initiate a rescue plan. So, I wonder if something similar is going on here, that Yahweh is plucking this individual, in this case a couple, out from the mass of humanity to initiate some kind of rescue plan. Already, the careful reader's wondering if that's Yahweh's intention. Avram, the name Avram, means exalted father. That's what it means. And I think you'll be surprised at when his name changes, what Yahweh is doing there. Maybe a little disappointed, but surprised. Okay, second part of verse 1. Halak from your Eretz, and from your relatives, from your father's house, to the Eretz, which I will show, or Ra'ai. So Avram is told to go from one Eretz to a new Eretz. Do any of you remember, maybe that took the 1 through 11 class, where the word Eretz first appears? Yeah, the first verse of the first page. First sentence, first page of the Bible. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'eretz. In other words, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the eretz, the skies and the land. So this is a loaded word. This is the safe place where people can actually live. And he's been told to go from his old Eretz to a new Eretz. This is like a clue of new beginnings, new creation about to happen. And he's saying, from your country, from your relatives, from your father's house. When you see this kind of similar word, idea, repetition, it's for a reason. Biblical authors don't waste words for, just as a flourish. There's something happening with this. It's a threefold occurrence of similar ideas, and we've already been introduced to this idea in the biblical text, is symbolic of a test. So there is a time of testing that is ahead. It's really the rest of his life for Avram, and this involves leaving what is precious to him, his own country, his own family, his father's own household. This is not the only time, because there's an emotional sacrifice. Can you feel that a little bit? I got to leave everything I know into this weird country. Who knows what kind of barbarian? I can't, look on Zillow and see, what the neighborhood's like, where I'm going. This is big test here, to leave everything and everybody I know and love and sacrifice that and go into this new land. It's a pivotal moment in Avram's calling. 10 pages from now, there's another 3-word strategy that is emotional, that is kind of layered onto this. They're different words, but it's the same strategy that's used, and it's the next time biblical authors use this. And it's another pivotal moment in test in Avram's life. but it's not your country, your relatives, your father's house. This time it's, in 10 pages, it'll be your son, your only son, the one that you love. It's not accidental. Biblical authors have linked these two things. So, one thing I hope you get out of this class is to see the brilliance behind how this narrative is put together. This is like literary jujitsu. I have a lot of respect for atheists and agnostics that come with honest criticisms and questions, and there are many. And legitimately, an atheist or agnostic could say, I don't believe this, I don't think it's true, I think it's a bunch of lies, and you know, we can interact on that basis. It's legitimate. But I don't think that an atheist or agnostic can come and say, these are a bunch of primitive morons writing this. As you will see, this is literary genius. Okay. To the land, or to the Eretz. And the land is Canaan, or Canaan, and which Avram's father Terah was called to, but he stopped part way there in Haran. So I want to give a map as to what this ultimate journey from Avram's father's day when they left their original homeland, traveling all the way, eventually, Avram to Canaan, would have looked like. There is a little bit of controversy here. I'll at least inform you. There are scholars that believe that the Ur that Avram's family was originally from was actually up north, closer to where you see Haran there. And there's some good arguments for that, which I disagree with, for mostly reasons of what I think that the biblical authors are trying to connect Avram's Ur to, which is the land associated with Babylon. So it makes more sense to me, and I could be wrong, that it is the traditional understanding of Ur, which is down near and south of Babylon. It's near the Tigris-Euphrates rivers, and so there was a march up through this very fertile country to Haran. And that's where Avram's father hung out, stopped, raised his family, and now Avram is 75 years old, we find out. And Yahweh's like, no, I'm calling you to this other land, Canaan, and I want you to leave your family there. And you see how it's like this big curve? I just want to note that it makes sense to go on this big elongated curve. A straight shot from Ur to Canaan, almost no one would have thought of making that because it's a very deserted place in between, and it's unlikely that you would survive the journey, or if you did, you'd be in good shape when you got there. So you would always travel through the Fertile Crescent. You'd go up and down, including later on armies that would attack Israel. So when you read in the scriptures that from the north this army came, but you find out that they're from Babylon, you're like, wait, that's not north, that's east. Well, that's because the route that they always took was this same route so that they could have water and food on the way. So anyway, that was free and extra. All right, so to this land, which I will show you. I want you to, if you have a pen, circle, or you can highlight on your phone the word show. Because words like show, appeared, see, vision, are going to repeat a gazillion times in the story of Avram. This actuates a central theme of his story that the biblical authors want us to see, this seeing theme. There's a whole cluster of Hebrew synonyms they keep popping up, and it draws our attention to the idea that Avram is being shown things by Yahweh so he can see. In a later chapter, we find out what happens when people who are not, so people who want to see things and take things that they see in their own way, that seems right to them to fulfill their impulses, what's their reward is blindness. But Avram is given these opportunities to be shown so that he can really see. Verse 2, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will barak you. So he has to harak, go, in order to receive the barak. See what I'm saying? This is a wordplay. This is intentional. They do puns in the Bible. I'm sorry if you don't like puns, the Bible's full of them. Except to the biblical authors, the puns aren't like a ha-ha dad joke. They're like actually, oh, kind of things. So, I will barak you, and I will make your Shem, your name, great. And you, this is really key, shall be a barak. Yeah, this is really cool. Avram is promised that he's going to be a founder of a great nation. He's going to be blessed. He's going to have a great name, which interacts with the Tower of Babel story. Remember why they built this tower? To make a name, a Shem for themselves? Well, now Yahweh's saying, no. I'm going to give you a great Shem. You don't have to make a Shem for yourself. So note that the text doesn't talk about Avram being blameless and upright. It does with Noah. It doesn't talk about that, just pointing it out. In other words, he's being offered these things in a literary sense prior to him being called righteous. So what is this word barak, or bless? Literally in Hebrew it means to kneel. The idea is like you kneel to receive a blessing from somebody. You're in a position to receive favor. So obviously, here is the narrative equivalent of an introduction to the concept of chosenness. Chosenness. Avram is chosen out of all the people in the world. It's him that is selected, chosen. There's a doctrinal word that's associated with this, you may have heard, called election. This is not the very first, but it is one of the primary examples that the New Testament authors go back to when they are discussing this idea of chosenness or election. And this passage, this little poem that the Bible, that the Abraham narrative opens with, tells us what election is all about. So if you've ever wondered, what is this fair? Well, we're going to learn this. Is it fair? So I think to answer the question, is it fair for God to choose one and not another? And if we're looking at it through ancient Israelite eyes, and remember, we're being good tourists, we have to first ask the question, what's election for in the first place? What's chosenness for? I think the modern assumption is, well, obviously it's so that you can go to heaven. Now, the biblical authors don't exclude that as being something that goes along with chosenness, but that is not primarily, biblically, what election is for. The reason a person is chosen, according to this text and others that we will see, is to be a blessing to others. So you are selected when you are chosen by God to be the conduit through whom God's blessing to other people flows. It is not like, oh, well, if you're not elect, then that means God doesn't love you, and there's not hope for you, and there's not heaven for you. They're not thinking in those terms at all. What they are thinking of is, oh, the elect one is the chosen one through whom all, in this case, the nations will be blessed, which actually does come to pass eventually. Okay, you will be a blessing. This is the first instance of an explicit explanation of why Yahweh chooses certain people. It's not only for the purpose of blessing that person, but of blessing others through that person. And this is the cornerstone idea of understanding election in the Bible. Please, I beg of you to put this filter on or this lens on when you are studying the concept of election. What is it for, biblically? To be chosen by Yahweh means to be a mediator of blessing to others. Well, he doubles down on this, the Moses team. I will bless those who bless you. This is still blessing others if they bless him, right? And the one who kalals you, I will arar. That's the typical word for curse, arar, that has been used prior in the book of Genesis. And in you, all the families of the Adamah will be blessed. Adamah is the ground from which the Adam was formed, right? So it's linking these concepts. The Adamah was what was cursed in Genesis chapter 3. And now there's going to be a blessing associated with the families of the Adamah. It's going to be reversed somehow through Avram and his family. So one of the features of being a channel of blessing is that those who bless the elect will themselves also be blessed. The one who curses, kalal is mistreats or abuses you, well, that person, Yahweh will arar, which is what Yahweh Elohim did to the serpent, to the ground, and it's also the name of the mountain that the ark rested upon. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on with this word, but we've got to move on. And in you, the families of the Adamah will be blessed. Circling back to the beginning of the poem when Yahweh tells Avram to leave his family. Leave your family, end of the poem, through you all the families of the earth will be blessed. You see how there's a linkage there? So surrendering the security and blessing of his own family, he's going to be used to bless all families. So I'm going to look at this poem with you in a structural form. It is a chiasm. So first part of the poem and the last part, link, second, and the second to the last, link, and then the middle is the key feature of it. So first section, leave your family and your land for a new land. And the last section, A prime, all families will be blessed through you, family, family. The second section, I'm gonna bless you and make your name great. The second to the last is, I'm gonna protect your blessing. And those who bless you will be blessed, those who curse you will be cursed. But the central focus of the poem is, you will be a blessing. You shall be a barak. That is the point of this calling. And the last three sections, if you'll notice, that correspond with with the first two and then the central part, are all inclusive of somehow blessing other people. You will be a blessing. I'm going to bless those who bless you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. You see the pattern here. When we read the story of Abraham, Avram calling here in chapter 12, the lens we usually put on is, well, why is he so special? But you see the lens that the biblical authors are trying to give us is, well, it's special because it's through him that everybody else is going to get blessed. That's the point. All right, verse 4. So Avram went away as the Lord had spoken to him. Yay! Oh, and Lot went with him. So he obeyed. And this recalls what Noah did in Genesis 6:22. Noah did all the things that the Lord told him to do, according to everything that God commanded him. So passed the test. But then we get this interesting little, and Lot went with him. Why is that there? Now, reflecting on this, did God say to bring Lot with him? Well, but did he say don't bring Lot? He didn't say don't bring Lot, so maybe it's okay. Maybe he's, his ward or something. But was Avram really fully leaving his father's house? If his nephew is coming, is this going to become a problem in the future, maybe? So Avram took his wife, Sarai, that would be expected, they're one flesh, and his nephew, Lot. Why did it repeat that? Already told us he brought Lot. Now we find out he's his nephew. And all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan, set out, and then they arrived. So Avram's wife, his nephew Lot, his possessions, and people all become points of tension in the stories that we're about to see. This narrative here, this is one verse, is setting things up and setting us up to identify points of testing and conflict in the pages to come. Oh, it's going to get interesting. I love how it says they set out for the land of Canaan, so they came to the land of Canaan. That's 400 miles. So this is an incredibly difficult journey in ancient times of more than 3 weeks. It's very dangerous lands. So the Moses team doesn't tell us about this 400-mile journey. Why? Because the biblical literary strategy is not to tell us what's interesting in everything that happened, which I've said before, but what is Torah about this? What is instructive about this? Torah means instruction of the events that happened. That's what we're supposed to focus on, not everything that happened. Events that are unrelated to the narrative goals are simply left out. That's what the Holy Spirit is inspiring here. Verse 6. Biblical authors are claiming that this is what you should be attending to, not, I wonder what happened on that 400-mile journey. That's the way we think today. I mean, I think it's interesting. I'm curious. But the biblical authors are inviting us to pay attention to what we're saying. Listen to the Holy Spirit and put your curiosity aside for just a little bit. Okay, so Avram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. Dun, dun, dun. All right, Shechem and Bethel are we find out, are Avram's first 2 stops. And they're also the first 2 stops that Jacob makes when he returns from the east later on in Genesis. They're also the first 2 stops, along with Ai, of the Israelites when they enter the promised land under Joshua. Future generations are going to retrace the journey of Avram, and Avram is foreshadowing the journey of these future generations. That's why it's mentioned here. So you see the pattern. So this oak of Moreh, some Bible translator thinks that it's referring to the terebinth tree and not the oak. People argue about these things. Take your pick. Moreh is the critical word here. First of all, the fact that it is a tree is very important. The word Moreh is related to a word meaning, seeing. There's that word again. Or showing. Seeing, appearing, vision, showing. That's that cluster of related words and synonyms we talked about before that always pop up in the story of Abraham, form a major theme of what we are supposed to see in his life story. So just step back for a second. What's going on? There is a man who is supposed to mediate blessing to the world somehow through his seed, and he sets up camp by a tree. Does this sound familiar? It sounds a bit like garden language, doesn't it? Okay. Oh, now, just so you know, the Canaanites were in the land at that time. So, you know how I keep saying the Moses team instead of Moses? And I said last week, it's a multi-generational team because Moses is not writing about people not being able to find his own grave. This is another one of those phrases that teaches us that Moses is not the only person writing here. When Moses was alive, the Canaanites were also in the land at that time, so this sentence wouldn't make sense. This is somebody saying to a generation of readers somewhere along the line, just so you know, this is back when Canaanites were in that land. They were in the land when Moses was alive. So this was somebody after Moses. Could have been Joshua, could have been somebody later writing this. The reason that I press this point is because I want to encourage you. The biblical authors themselves never claim that Moses is the sole author of the first 5 books of the Bible. In fact, there are explicit things in there to the contrary. They never claim that. Moses is used throughout Jewish history, including back in Jesus' day, as a heading for the one whom all these 5 books are associated with, but nobody imagined that, that knew anything, that Moses was sitting there with a pen or a stylus writing everything on his own. That just wasn't part of the picture for anybody in the ancient world. We tend to impose that ourselves on the text. And I think that we need to let that go A, because it's not claimed by the Bible, so why do we impose something that the Bible doesn't claim? And B, because it leads to trouble when we teach that to our kids. We teach to our kids, plant the flag. Moses wrote every word of the first 5 books of the Bible, and if you don't believe that, you're going to hell. And they do research later and find out, wait, that can't be true. What happens to their faith? We don't want to impose a marker on faith that the Bible itself does not impose because it's dangerous. You see what I'm saying? And by the way, that does happen. That sort of thing happens a lot because of traditions that we have imposed in the Bible that the Bible's not asking us to. Okay, that's just a little pet peeve of mine. I hope you'll let that go. Take a deep breath. Whew. Okay. Verse 7, the Lord appeared to Avram. Lord appeared. That's the first time, I think, in the whole Bible so far we have the Lord appeared to. And said, to your descendants, I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. There's 2 appear words. The principle of first mention when interpreting scripture is that the first time you see a phrase used, now, the Lord obviously interacted with people earlier in the scripture, in the first 11 chapters, but the phrase, and the Lord appeared, which is fairly frequent throughout the scripture, this is the first time that phrase occurs. And it's in conjunction with a promise that the Lord gives and a response of worship. That's critical, I think, as a basis to kind of keep in our minds and hearts, maybe put a pin in that every other time we see the phrase, and the Lord appeared, that this is something to expect and the response is what ought to be. So expect some sort of revelation, a promise or prophecy from the one who appears, and the response should be worship. And the worship of Avram was building an altar. In the case of Noah, Yahweh's promise to him, although it doesn't use the phrase, and the Lord appeared, his promise came after Noah's worship. In this case, the promise comes before Avram's worship. This is the critical point. Yahweh is engaging in preemptive favor or preemptive grace before the one he favors has even done anything to earn it. And the Apostle Paul latches on this, as you probably know, on how we should understand grace as favor that we have not earned. So Avram has the proper response, but before he even has that response, the Lord favors him and gives him the word. So verse 8, then he, this is Avram, proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, called upon the name of the Lord. And we have seen called upon the name of the Lord already in Enosh, I think, in Genesis chapter 5, I think. So he's doing this calling on the name of the Lord thing. And Avram journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. Bethel, in the future, in Genesis, is the place of Yahweh's appearance to Jacob. But to the first audience that's reading this or hearing this for the first time, that's also in the past, because this is the people of the Exodus that would be the first people to potentially hear this story. So to them, they already potentially have heard or are about to hear about Jacob and what happened with him at Bethel. Remember, he saw this ladder, but probably better translated ramp, to heaven with Malik, with these spiritual beings going up and down the ladder or the ramp. Ai, on the other hand, was the site of the defeat of the Israelites because of idolatry in the camp in the book of Joshua. So Avram's story, this is a literary clue. Avram's story is a back and forth between passing tests and failing tests. Passing tests, failing tests. He's between Bethel and Ai, which is really cool because he just passed a major test, although with a little asterisk. He left his homeland. He went to Canaan, And he brought Lot, but he sort of passed the test, we think. The next story that we look at next week, massive fail. I mean, massive fail. Okay. I found this quote helpful, and I hope you do too, from Gary Edward Schnitger, is how it's pronounced, who's a brilliant scholar on the first 5 books of the Bible and other things. Old Testament, use of Old Testament as well. And in his book, Torah, Story, and Apprenticeship on the Pentateuch, he writes, the Torah, and he's referring to the first 5 books of the Bible here, houses the story of the beginning of the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. The focus through the remainder of Genesis, in other words, after Abraham's story, is on the offspring or the seeds. Exodus and Leviticus underscore the blessing in terms of relationship with God. Numbers and Deuteronomy demonstrate the progress to the land and offer instruction for living in the land. You see, these are all the promises for these verses that are now spelled out in the rest of the first 5 books. That was me. Yahweh returns several times and expands upon his threefold promise in the Abraham cycle of stories. The word of God to Avram will be clarified, extended, and looked back upon through the rest of the Torah, and in a real sense, through the entire Christian Bible. You see why these stories are so pivotal and densely packed with meaning? The Abraham narrative is crucial, in my opinion, for understanding the rest of the Bible. Okay, having just read this, pretend you're an ancient Israelite, you've just left Egypt, you're hanging out with Moses and company, and you have just heard this read aloud, or maybe you've read it yourself for the very first time. What would your reaction be? I think some of the things that might go through your mind, because you've read the first 11 chapters as well, that Avram, like Adam and like Noah, is singled out by Yahweh. In the cases of Adam and Noah, their chosenness was marred by covenant failure. The Adam, the Ish and the Isha, the husband and wife, there was a covenant failure at taking what seemed right in their own eyes instead of waiting for Yahweh to teach them the difference between Tov and Ra, or good and bad. They wanted it for themselves. They listened to the deception of the serpent. So it was marred. They broke a covenant of the one thing God asked them not to do. In the case of Noah, Noah, he drank from fermented fruit. So Adam and Eve, they took the fruit that was forbidden and they found themselves naked and ashamed, right? Remember that? Noah, he drinks from fermented fruit from this vineyard that he built, and then he ends up naked. And something sketchy happens in the tent with him, which whole thing. So you see the parallels here? How is this singling out, this number 3 singling out? How is this going to pan out? So Avram is called to leave family, clan, country to a shown land. The first readers of this narrative were themselves also leaving everything they had known in Egypt. They'd lived in Egypt for hundreds of years, multi-generations. And they're going to a land that Yahweh is going to show them. So Avram's calling, they would be like, oh, that's like what's happening to us. You see how they would be able to connect with it immediately? The great nation that Yahweh promised Avram here was forming in the now of the first audience during and right after the Exodus. They're like, that's us. That's the great nation. And that Yahweh would bless Avram and curse those who disdained him, well, that's logical. I mean, that's just how things work, right? But Yahweh's intent for Avram to be a blessing and for all nations to be blessed through his seed might have seemed like, what's that all about? That's strange. Why would Yahweh care so deeply for nations that he didn't even choose? And this is a head scratcher for the original audience. And Moses and his writing team want them to be thinking about this. So what about us? What are some good ways for us to reflect on it? First of all, when God chooses Avram, it's not just for the benefit of Avram, or even just Avram and his descendants. It's also for the benefit of those who are not chosen. Got to get this in our heads. Is God's purpose for our lives, is it just for us and our families and our tribe and so on? Or does God have other people in mind when he chooses us? Also, Avram is 75 here. What's the age limit of our usefulness to God? This is when it starts with him, 75 years of age. So when is it too late for us? Yahweh sent Avram to a land associated with a curse. Canaan was associated with a curse. We find out from, I think it's Genesis 9. So is God in the business of using called people to reverse curses that others have brought upon themselves? I think so, yes. I think so, yes. All right, so we're going to spend a few moments with some of our intrepid students here at this table to get some of their reflections. And then if you all have sent in questions during this, I'll attempt to respond to a few of those questions. So can we give it up for our brave people at this table? Really appreciate you doing this. So, okay, thoughts, reflections, ideas?
Every time I look at Abraham, I start to think of us because he's so like us. And I think it's in chapter 2 of 12. Abram is saying he's still childless. He doesn't see any hope. And then all of a sudden, the Lord gets in and talks to him. The part that I'm jealous about is that it was almost like God did this. Come outside with me and see the stars. And he cannot see it. And I think so many of us in our ordinary life go along and never can see the stars or count them as the Lord put it to him. So when I look at that and I attach it to any of us today, it's so close.
Yes, thank you. Very wise. And there's going to be a tension of that in future weeks for sure. But I just think this would be a good moment to say to you, Robin, that if the Lord were to appear and speak with your accent, I would not complain. It's a beautiful accent.
I don't know if I'm way off here, but I also see so many parallels in Abraham's story and us. Like, the Lord chose us. He wants us to go out and be a blessing. We make mistakes like Abraham is and will be doing more of. And he just continues to show us grace.
That's a spoiler. You're spoiling. No, that's good.
And then he just continues to show us grace. And also, I think that how it's shown in the story about like the repetitiveness, like he took the same way as Jacob and then the Israelites, and it's kind of like inviting us to like take the same, way and be a blessing to others, and he chose us, and all of those little nuggets that are in here, I kind of feel like I can apply it to what we're supposed to do.
I love how you've already picked up the very biblical habit of seeing Abraham as a mirror and looking into it and seeing yourself to a degree. And that is such a biblical perspective. Thank you. Yes. Mac.
Getting too old to reach across the table. There were two particular things that you went over tonight, Mr. Miyagi.
Far from it, but thank you.
The age of the folks that Yahweh called to service. Abram was 75 years old. I think Moses was in his 80s. And then at the end, you asked a question that really deserves an answer. And that question is, let me turn to it. It's on the last page. What is the age limit of our usefulness to God? The second thing that really struck me was the way you defined elections. And that word is so important here in 2024. We want to elect someone that's going to be a blessing to us all. So I would just encourage folks when they go in the booth, let's elect someone who's going to be a blessing to us all.
Well, you know, I love you, Mac. I love you very, very much. You are amazing. You're amazing. That's all I'll say. All right. So maybe there's some questions, maybe there aren't, but
The first
Amberly?
question is,
there are questions.
Are the first 5 books of the Bible identical verse for verse to the Torah?
Torah is just another way of saying the first 5 books of the Bible. So it's just a term for the first 5 books. There's if you were to go to Bible college, you will probably hear, the first thing you'd hear year 1 is that they're called the Pentateuch, which is the Greek term for these first 5 books. Penta is 5. But in Jesus' day, Hebrew speakers would have called it Torah. It's the same 5 books.
Another question is,
So the meaning of it is usually translated in our English Bibles as law. So in the prophets and in later books, when you hear law, that's usually that word Torah. In the New Testament, they use the Greek nomos for Torah, and that's also usually translated law. But the meaning of Torah, it includes law, so it's not a bad translation, but it is deeper than that. The idea is instruction. This is, because it's not just laws. The whole Torah, including the stories, are instruction for us. So,
if Abram's family were idol worshippers, how did his relationship with God begin?
yeah, so gold star for the question, because you're reading ahead. In Joshua, it's mentioned that the family of Avram were idol worshipers. However, that's not explicit in the Abraham story. That is something that we find out in hindsight later on. I'm sorry, read that question again, because I just wanted to point that out.
If Abram's family were idol worshippers, how did his relationship with God begin?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Aren't idol worshipers exempt from God ever appearing or speaking to them? Apparently not. Apparently not. And I love how you said Abraham there. That warmed my heart. That was really cool. Thank you, Amberly.
And I think that's all the questions we have for today.
All right, so thank you guys. I just want to encourage you, if you're a man, you are welcome to come and have pizza with the men over here in the chapel as soon as Amberly closes us out in prayer. If you're a woman, you are welcome to stay, and I believe that there are homemade cupcakes and coffee. I don't know if the coffee's homemade or not, but please stay for that. And let's look ahead to next week. Just take a deep breath, fasten your seatbelt, because we're going to get shaken a little bit with how this great founding father of the faith is portrayed next week. I love you guys.